Howdy, welcome to the Maze Mastercast. I'm your host, Ben Wiggins, and we are fired up for today's discussion. The vision of the Maze Mastercast is to connect prospective members to our Maze community by painting the picture of Aggieland through different voices and perspectives. Today's guest, Keith Wilcox, is the Macy's Foundation professor in the marketing department at Mays Business School. His research examines consumer behavior and decision-making with a specific focus on self-control and how feelings influence judgment. Keith's industry experience includes several years working as an advertising account executive and as a marketing consultant. We welcome Keith Wilcox to the show. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
So you're fresh to Texas A&M this year. What brought you to A&M?
You know, if you talked to me 2 years ago, I would have said the chances of me leaving New York are pretty small. But one of the things that really attracted me at A&M is I kind of call them an academic unicorn. And so what I mean by that is basically if you talk to any academic, what do they want in a job? They'll say, number one, resources to do research. And then close number two would be a good culture in the department, supportive faculty, and things like that.
Okay.
What I've kind of learned through my career, though, is that you usually can't find both in the same place. There's always a trade-off.
Okay.
So the schools that have great culture, usually they're having you overteach and they don't give you as much resources for doing research. The research schools, typically they have I wouldn't say poor cultures, but the culture is a little bit more kind of, I would say, competitive or not supportive is probably the best way to put it.
Interesting.
I think one of my friends described the culture in some of these research institutions as throw a hatchet on the floor and see what happens.
Nice. So, academic unicorn, you heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. Having grown up in New York,
yeah.
You went to school at Baruch, taught at Berkeley, and now you're in growing College Station. What's that like? I have a little bit of experience with this myself. I grew up here, but lived on the West Coast for several years and came back from Los Angeles in 2015. But I'm interested in your take. Obviously, New York, LA, but you were at Berkeley.
Yep.
So you've been a lot of different places. What's your take on the city?
College Station, actually, the thing that I think I like the most is the people, hands down.
Okay.
Authentically, genuinely nice. And what I mean, and I think the authentic part's important because I've lived in a lot of places where people are quote unquote nice, but really deep down you kind of know that they're not.
Let's talk about LA.
Here, on the other hand, it's like, when I first got here, I was like, okay, something's going to happen to show me that this is not all true, but it actually is. So that's probably what I like the most. I mean, New Yorkers are nice, but a different kind of nice.
Yeah, yeah.
New Yorkers will help you get around. They will do stuff, but at the same time, they'll knock you out of the way if you're in the middle of where they need to go.
Yes, yes, and I really appreciate the fact that, and I understand this just is not the case in bigger cities, but you can say hello to someone you pass on the sidewalk, and you're not imposing on them. In bigger cities, it just doesn't really work.
Yeah.
What's challenging about this community?
So challenging. So I'll tell you what is not challenging that I thought would be challenging was the restaurant scene. Okay. So, I'm coming from a neighborhood that probably had some of the best restaurants in New York, and that was probably my biggest concern. But then I kind of looked at it, and I was like, well, even though I live in this neighborhood with all these great restaurants in New York, I really only go to like 5 restaurants. So I found my 5 here, and I'm totally happy with that.
What are your 5?
So let's see. 1775, the barbecue place is awesome.
Yeah.
Porter's I like a lot. Great bar scene.
Sure.
Ronin, I actually think Ronin's probably one of my favorites. I could just plant that down in Brooklyn where I was living, and it would just fit right in there.
Yeah.
Trying to think now. You're making me blank on some of the other ones. That's all I can think of.
Right. Those are the best of the best. Yeah. Your research examines the consumer's decision making and behavior. What does your research aim to persuade, and how can it be applied to people today?
So my research, if we unpack the consumer decision making, there are a lot of different things you can study. I study self-control. And the ultimate goal there is to help consumers make better decisions related to their finances, they're eating, things like that. So the ideal is to kind of like come up with ways to help consumers improve their behavior, but that's not necessarily always the case. And I'll give you an example of this. So years ago, I was working on a project, and the project was basically looking at what happens when you add a healthy option to an unhealthy menu, like McDonald's.
Okay.
So what happens when you add a salad to a McDonald's menu, right?
Yeah.
You would think that that should make people eat healthier, but we actually find for a large group of people, it actually makes them more likely to eat French fries. So they kind of reject the salad and go for the most unhealthy option on the menu.
Huh.
Yeah. So now how does this relate? So a couple of years ago, one of my co-authors on that, he's at Duke, he was giving a presentation on the paper, and an executive, and I won't mention the name, from a large convenience store company came up to him and they said, well, so based on what you just said, if I put healthy food up near the checkout counter, not only will people buy healthy food, but they'll also be more likely to buy unhealthy junk food that's right up by the counter. And he's like, I guess so. And so they did that, and that's exactly what happened. So they actually increased their store sales by selling both healthy foods, but also an increase in the unhealthy foods they were selling.
So is there any context in which people are more likely to buy healthier foods?
Well,
is this just a lost cause? Or
don't get me wrong. Some people do buy the salad.
Okay.
But once they don't, then they're more likely to get the French fries.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh. So what then... So what else have you discovered? I mean, that's a fascinating discovery to me. But what else have you unearthed in the course of this work? Like, what else have you learned about consumer behavior, and what makes people, what else has been most unexpected for you? Yes. I guess because that's a very unexpected finding.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of the stuff I think that I looks at the kind of unexpected ways that we trip ourselves up. So that's just one. Another example is, we're looking at what happens when people incur credit card debt. And actually, again, for the same psychological profile as the people that are more likely to eat the French fries, when they incur credit card debt, they're also more likely to spend money.
Wow.
Yeah. It's actually something called the what the hell effect.
Oh.
So basically, it's like, you can think about it in food. If you you look at that bag of Doritos, you don't want to eat it, but as soon as you open it up, it's all gone.
You just eat the whole thing.
And that's the same thing with credit card debt.
The F it thing. Yeah. Were there moments or opportunities that influenced your own decision making and view on real life to jumpstart this type of work?
Probably the most formative kind of moment in my life started off as what I thought was going to be a baseball camp. So I was really good at baseball when I was a kid, and my mom was I was playing with some of my friends from elementary school. I think I was like 10 years old. And my mom came up to me afterwards. She said, I was talking to some of the parents, and they're going to have their sons try out for this international baseball camp. Are you interested? Right?
Wow, an international basball camp.
International baseball camp. And I was like, first of all, I was looking at the kids I was playing with. I was like, well, I'm a lot better than them. So of course I should try out. But also I was like, be interesting to get out of the country. I mean, I was only 10.
Right. MLB, here I come.
Yeah. So first tryouts, though, quickly realized, so when we show up to this place, there was no baseball field, no nothing. It was this like apartment on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and they had us doing all sorts of weird things like testing our nonverbal communication ability, our adaptability, and all these different things. And it quickly dawned on me that this
was secret agent training.
Exactly. But it quickly dawned on me it wasn't baseball.
Right, not baseball. So what was it?
So my mom came to me at lunch. She said, okay, so this is not a baseball thing. I was like, I kind of figured that.
Yeah.
So it turns out it was a summer camp called Children's International Summer Villages, and it was started during the Cold War with the idea that if you take 11-year-olds, because they picked 11 because 11 is a really formative stage for people.
Okay.
And so they said if we're going to take like four 11-year-olds from different countries around the United States and put them together in a summer camp.
Yeah. And
the idea, if you kind of train the quote-unquote future leaders and get them to kind of understand everybody else's perspective, then this will actually make the world a better place.
Okay.
And so I ended up getting selected, and I spent 6 weeks in a summer camp in Finland.
Finland?
Yes, with kids from all over all over the world.
This still sounds like the X-Men. Are you sure you don't have any superpowers?
No, definitely not.
What were the things that you learned there?
I think just an appreciation of different cultures, and also kind of how we're all very different on the outside, but very inside, we're just kids. And I think that applies to humans too.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that that's kind of shaped my view on studying consumer behavior and things like that.
Yeah. Something I've said a few times in here and has been sort of, I think, one of the defining characteristics of social discourse over the past several years is we're all, the social dilemma, all of this stuff, we're all jammed together in order to maximize engagement, because that's what makes money for social media. But in the course of that, there's been kind of this unexpected effect that actually goes the opposite direction, which is, in the course of learning about each other and learning about people who are on the other side of the aisle, we come to realize that they are people just like us who have been raised in very different belief systems. Whether those beliefs are religious or political or what have you, it's still that person who believes something very different from what I believe is not so different from me.
And I'll go forward. I think part of the issue with social media is that it shapes your beliefs about what other people think, and they don't actually think that.
Yes,
right?
Yes. And there was some research maybe a year or two ago that suggested both Republicans and Democrats believe, the headline was a little clickbaity, but it was like, Republicans and Democrats both believe the other side hates them far more than they actually do. But
there was actually this research I talked about in one of my classes, and I forget exactly what journal it was published or anything like that, but I thought it was pretty interesting, was, in Saudi Arabia, women aren't allowed to work unless their husband allows them to work, right? And it turns out these researchers, they start interviewing a lot of younger husbands, and it turns out that if you ask them individually, they all think that it's okay for their wives to work, but they think everybody else doesn't think it's appropriate for women to work.
Okay.
Right? And so once they actually communicated that to these people, right, then they followed up with the ones that they told, well, a lot of people actually think that their wives should work. And a large percentage of their wives had applied for a job within the first 6 months after that conversation.
Well, any way we can get forward progress is good.
Yeah.
But that's, kind of the group think of it, and the, opt in rather than opt out. All of those framing dynamics are really, really compelling to me. What about struggles? So you've had some wonderful opportunities, but what's been hard for you?
I would say throughout my life, probably the reason why I study self-control is that I've struggled with my weight throughout my life, right? And so I would say, growing up as a fat kid definitely kind of impacts you, and it carries with you throughout your life.
Yeah.
I was definitely much shyer back when I was, even the Finland experience probably actually cracked me out of my shell. But going up to that, it was definitely very, very kind of withdrawn and things like that. And so that's something that obviously shapes what I do for research and kind of guides me throughout my life. So
yeah. I still feel like this is your superhero origin story. This is how you became one of the X-Men. Prior to becoming a professor, you were an advertising account executive and marketing consultant. From those experiences, what were your biggest motivators to start teaching?
So the advertising experience, I think, really is what got me into marketing. So I really appreciated that. It was actually the consulting experience that was the reason why I went back to get my PhD. So I can tell you, so my last engagement in consulting, I remember it was a very so I used to be a turnaround consultant. So what that basically means is that you essentially are working with companies that are having problems.
Yeah.
And, sometimes you're getting them out of the problems, but also sometimes you're actually just winding them down or doing other things. And so this last engagement, it was a very profitable company, well run. It just so happened that their parent company wasn't well run and was going bankrupt. And so this very profitable company with a lot of government contracts was about to get sold.
Okay.
Now, the problem with that is I was working on this and we were kind of managing the sale, is that, you had a bunch of people here who had been lifers for this company, good at their jobs, worked there 30, 40 years. And as soon as the company was sold, it was pretty apparent that whoever bought them was going to fire most of the people that work there and just take the government contracts. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And it kind of stuck out to me that this isn't the way business should go. Right?
Yeah.
You should not be somebody who's good at your job, who's dedicated to the same company, and then because of no fault of your own, the company you're out of a job. And so I think that kind of shaped me to go back and get my PhD and teach business. So,
in order and you. So I mean, we line up on the sort of this is not right nature of the thing, but what change did you hope that you could make in the world as a result of that?
I think, and maybe this is also part of what attracted me to Mays, is I think that when you teach business, you have to also teach the ethical component of it, or maybe a kind of values-driven component of it. I mean, obviously it's business, so you can't bring too much into it, but at least if you teach students to think in a certain way about things, maybe they'll have a more ethical view of what they do.
Yeah, business is best when it's not just about the bottom line.
Yep.
What's next for you? What road do you want to continue paving while you're here at Mays?
I think right now I'm focused on the students, both the undergrads that I teach, but also the PhD students that I'm guiding. Mm-hmm. So kind of helping the future business leaders, also helping them to think about things in a way that's different than kind of the traditional business approach. So incorporating more ethics into that, and also some kind of more, analytical thinking, and just helping students become good people when they get out.
What are the ethical values that you feel like have been the most, what's produced kind of an unexpected angle for you? What do you feel like you've spent more time with than you would have expected? What do you feel like people are already grabbing in a way that people are farther ahead than you thought? Like how has the landscape been different from what you thought it would be?
I would say that when I started my PhD program, it was a very different student. I taught even during that, and it was a very different student that I was teaching now. I would say that the students that I'm teaching now, the millennials in particular, are they wear their values to some extent on their chest or on their shoulder or whatever it is, and they almost kind of force you to kind of step up your game, which I don't think was the case when I first started teaching.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest approach, is that the younger generation is definitely more focused on doing what's right.
ESG. Yeah. Okay. What about some good bull? Anyone you'd like to send some good bull?
Yeah, I'd like to send 2 good bulls if possible. So
Please.
We've got Dwayne Ireland, our current dean, and Eli Jones, our former dean. And I just want to send them a good bull because they are both been very influential over me. They helped hire me, and I'm very appreciative to be here.
Two great gentlemen. I know Eli a little bit better than I know Dwayne, but I've had nothing but great experiences with both.
Yeah.
Keith, thanks so much for the time. We really appreciate you this morning. Thanks for coming by to see us.
Thanks.
Thank you for watching. We appreciate your support. Drop us a like below and feel free to leave a comment if you wish. We appreciate positivity and constructive feedback. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on our latest episodes and bonus content. You can also take us on the road using your favorite podcast listening app. We have those linked below. If you'd like to know more about Mays Business School or our guests, visit mays.tamu.edu/podcasts. Talk with you soon.